Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. I'm going to work on a Zebco rear drag reel today. It's an entry-level reel. I previewed this as one of those projects that came into my shop, and there seems to be a lot of interest in it, so we're going to do it. This is a plastic case and a very sluggish reel. So we'll find out what's going on with this reel, and we'll see if we can't get it working. My guess is this is probably part of a Zebco entry-level combination. Probably sold for around $20, maybe, freshwater fishing. This one was made in China, and we'll take it apart. We'll show you how it was made, and we'll see if we can improve that sluggishness a little bit. Seems to me like it would just be dried grease. Maybe that's all it needs, and we'll go from there. I'm just going to tighten up this drag, see if we're holding on the drag. And we're holding good enough for what you're going to encounter. Alright, it's a real drag reel. Alright, so let's start by taking off the exterior pieces, and while I do that, I want to thank our first responders and essential personnel for everything it is that they're doing. I just recently heard from a fellow that has been assigned to the COVID ward at a local hospital since the beginning. Truly a hometown hero. It's so hard to wake up and imagine every day somebody's fighting in a life and death situation. Thank you for everything it is that you do. First aid squads, EMTs, fire, police, anybody in the medical field, thank you for your responses and your dedication to keeping us safe during the pandemic. Alright, so there's 4 side plate screws here we're going to take out after we remove the handle. And you saw that the handle was a through screw. In other words, the screw on the other side of the reel was actually holding the handle in, and that just simply removes in a counterclockwise direction. So now we've got 4 side plate screws that come off next, and I'm not quite sure if this side plate is going to be removed with or without this rear drag, so we'll show you how to take that rear drag out as well. These Zebcos, that's kind of how they got started. It was function and simplicity was kind of their key. It came into being in the late 1940s, and it came into being with that spin cast reel. That was a closed face design, and that closed face design is still around today and still very popular. In the late 1950s, Zebco acquired a company called Langley, which was working on spin fishing reels, and after that acquisition, Zebco started to introduce spinning reels as well as their closed face reel. Alright, there's a little screw cap, and then you should be able to loosen down this and take the rear drag off. And if you take the rear drag off, then you have full access to this case here. So let's go ahead and pull the case. There we go, and that's kind of what I was suspecting, why I was hearing what I was hearing. It's just a whole bunch of dried grease, and we'll take care of that. So in order to continue with the service, then you want to remove the main gear. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't, without removing the axle shaft. So I'll just make it a habit here. We'll just go ahead and remove the axle shaft. So there's a little tie down here. You'll notice off camera, but I do use a parts tray. I use the bottom of the jug, and that keeps all my pieces and parts in one place so that I know where to go find them later when it's time to reinstall. This has got a U-clip that's held in by a single screw. That single screw is tied down to a crosswind block, and that attaches the axle shaft to that so that this axle shaft can go up and down when it's powered by the oscillation gear. That's that U-clip. It's a double U-clip that I was referring to. That'll go into a separate section, and then we should be able to remove the axle shaft simply by pulling up. That'll enable us to remove the main gear. Notice on the back we've got a bushing that'll come off. We also have this little wire here. That wire acts as an eccentric, and that eccentric becomes a piece of the anti-reverse process. And then here's all the old grease that got thrown off of the main gear, and it just got deposited behind it in kind of the shallows there. So clean that up, clean off the axle shaft itself where that eccentric is riding, and that can go in the tray as well. There's 2 more pieces that are floating in here then. That's the oscillation gear, and that's the crosswind block. So they both kind of have that same tarred grease to it. So just on a quick look here, this is going to run just fine, thank you very much, as soon as we put new grease in there. So not exactly the squeaky wheel because it wasn't squeaking, but if it's a hard drive, then chances are that the grease is dried out and needs to be replaced. Here's a bearing, or a bushing rather. There's 2 points on that. It might be hard to see, but they're opposing at 180 degrees. And there's 2 holes in the case here, one on each side, and those little tags go into those holes in the cases to make sure it's properly seated. And you'll notice I use a little pick. It just kind of helps move and push and do things like that. So that's properly seated in there now. All right, before I do anything else, this is your anti-reverse dog. It's going to be driven by that little horseshoe spring that I showed you on the back of the main drive. So I'm just going to oil that up. Okay, so before I was interrupted by a phone call. Yep, this is a business and I do get phone calls, and every now and then I forget to mute my phone, and that's exactly what happened there. So I'm taking the axle shaft now. We're going to clean that up. I'm just going to lay it off to the side. We already removed the old grease on the crosswind block, and in the back here in the cavity is some old grease on that oscillating gear. So we'll just get that out, and I'm using a Q-tip to do that. Q-tip is, I guess, the trade name. I am using a cotton swab. How's that for all of the trade name police folks out there? All right, I'm going to remove this rotor. I don't expect to see anything under here, but we're going to remove it anyway, just because that's what you should do in a full service. Take the whole reel apart, and that'll help you to make sure that if there is any sand or anything else in here that might be tying it down that way, that'll be okay as well. While I have it in this position, I'm going to take some penetrating oil and just squirt into the seams of that bale wire just to make sure that that works smoothly as well. All right, we're going to remove that. There is appears to be a bearing up here, so it's a good thing that I did take this off. I was just assuming bushing. That's okay. We'll take these 2 screws out while I'm at it. I'm going to leave that nut on my desk right there because we're not going far with this. We're going to pull this. We're going to make sure that it's clean. I do notice a little bit of dirt around the case here, so we'll do that as well. So what's the advantages or disadvantages of a plastic case, which is what we have here? No, this happens to be one of them. Okay, well, we have a plastic bushing. That didn't matter much. We have our pinion gear, which we'll clean off. So the advantage is it's lightweight and it's cheap. So if you're looking to come up with an economy or a value reel, then using plastic instead of metals or graphites is certainly going to reduce the cost of the piece that you're making. What's the disadvantages? Well, if it becomes brittle, it can crack. So you have to. It's more fragile than the other components, and that will take away from its useful life. Plastic bushing, nothing needed there. This is the intersection for your anti-reverse dog. You can see the hooks on these. That's where your anti-reverse dog, which comes through the case here. We just oiled it there. You can see it up here on the case. That's going to come through, and that's going to hook in here to stop the reel from going in reverse. And there's also a override on this so that you can functionally do that as well. All right, we're going to put this back in then. We just took care of that. I brushed off the little bit of dirt and grease and that was in there. Go ahead and put these screws back in. Put the rotor back on. Re-grease, reassemble, and this wheel should run a whole lot smoother. Now, it doesn't have ball bearings, so it's not going to be the fastest or the smoothest reel, but if it's a learner's reel, every reel has a place, and as long as you're going to continue with what you bought the reel for, the reels will last a long time. So let's say this was considered maybe for an occasional use at a cottage or at a shore house or something, or a lake house, and it was a light duty reel and it was meant for somebody who's just learning. You know what? This will last a long time if you just take care of it. Just do what we're doing here. Of course, if it doesn't get a lot of use, if it's occasional and hasn't been used in a year and you haven't serviced it and it's dried out, then that'll bog the performance down. So there was a little shim washer that goes here that just came off when I set that nut down. So let's go put that shim washer back on. We'll tighten this up. I'm using a 12 millimeter socket here. It's a Mitchell tool. It happens to work on Zebcos just fine. But so we just playing around with this, making sure that we have this this set up properly. All right. The next step, then, we're going to take that crosswind block. Going to replace the grease that's dried out on that. And we're going to do, crosswind block gets used everywhere. So you put it on the back where it's going to track onto the case. You put it onto the gear teeth, which is where the teeth on the main gear are going to intersect. And you put it on the front where the crosswind block is going to ride. So there you go. When you assemble the reel, make sure that the stud is down. It makes it a whole lot easier in terms of mating that axle shaft and getting that little U-clip that we were talking about done. Okay, there's a window on the main gear here, and you want to make sure that you align that little metal tag that we were talking about, that eccentric spring. You want to line it up with that window, sort of like this. I'm not sure if it's easy to see or not. Make sure you can look through that window and see that little tag. That becomes important as you install the spring into the little slot for the anti-reverse dog. Just give it some good grease on both sides. You want to grease that back gear, which is driving the oscillating gear. You want to grease the teeth on the main gear, which is going to intersect with the pinion gear. All right, ride it up this way, look through, make sure you see that. And you're going for this little slot. There's a little slot right there. And that's the one that's going to drive the anti-reverse when you go to backstop. So you want to get the hook of that spring into there. Sometimes you can look over the top, make sure that you're approximately in place. Then you can look through the window and make sure that you've completed it, which I have. I know it's hard to see, but it is in there. And then you can go ahead and take your axle shaft, get a little bit of grease on that. We've cleaned it off already. Slide your axle shaft through. Bring that down. Oops. Got to put my crosswind block on. That was an oops. All right. A little grease onto the slot where the stud is going to ride, and the back, which is the plate that's going to ride onto the gear. Now we can go ahead and put that in, and then you have to mate into the rear drag assembly as well. There's two slots in that axle shaft. One goes high, one goes low. You want to get it that way. And then if you weren't paying attention before, there's a wide side and a flat side. Well, the wide side's going down here after you put those two pieces into the slots like that. Kind of wraps around, and then just use that pin to center this so that you can get that small screw. Which goes into that assembly. Now that's a small screw, and me and small screws don't do well. I'm going to put a little bit of grease on there to see if we can't hold it down that way. And then we can just install. Now let's finish up tightening that little screw. And we got that other screw that's a set screw that goes up top here, so let's go ahead and put that in. And soon enough we'll be able to give this a test drive. This screw holds that rotor nut from moving and loosening up with the run on the rotor there. Alright, so cap goes on next, side plate. So we've pretty much fully lubricated this right now. And this is the same issue as on the other side. There's two tags here, so you probably want to take that bushing off. Seat that bushing into the case, otherwise the case won't close properly. Make sure that it's flush. Since I took it off, I'll just put a little bit more grease onto the shaft there. Now we can reinstall. And that should fit nice and flush, which it does. Take the 4 side plate screws and put those in. So if you like this kind of video, I ask you to subscribe. And if you do subscribe, hit the notification button so that you'll see when I post. And that way, when new episodes become available, you can make a decision as to whether that's something you want to watch or not. I would also like you to leave comments if you have any questions regarding the servicing of a reel, any reel. It doesn't have to be this one. But if you're working on a reel, maybe you're stuck. Maybe there's a question about a piece or a part, your orientation and the like. Maybe you didn't take pictures when you started the exercise, whatever. Leave them in the comment section. I do try to answer those in the mornings. And if you have a reel that needs to be serviced, well, you can do like Randy did here. I do service reels by mail, and you can request that information by contacting me on the email on the business card that follows. And of course, if you are liking this video, then please just hit the like button. Let other folks know that you've appreciated the video. And I don't know if it moves up in the rankings, what it does. I'm a real repair person. I'm not a technician or a social media person. So whatever, if it, I understand that it helps somehow, but if you could like it and indicate so, I would appreciate that as well. All right, so we're just tightening these down. Now with a plastic case, we talked a little bit about the advantages and disadvantages. One of them is right here. Don't over tighten the screws. Make sure they're snug. And most of these have that machine thread kind of a thing going on. But just make sure that they're snug but not over tight, because over tight will get you. All right, let's put the handle in. Realizing that we haven't touched the drag at all. The drag was holding. There's no need in a basic service if your drag is holding to go do anything with that. If you were having a slipping drag, then you would, of course, you take it out and check it. To remove it, just as a recap, there's a little spring clip that's sitting right here. You would remove that spring clip, and that'll pull that entire drag assembly off. Okay, I'm just going to put this adjuster back on. That's held in with this plastic screw here. And the only thing I've ever seen as a problem with this plastic screw is if it's come a little loose. I have seen where this is worn down from hitting pier pilings and things, and you can't grab that slot. Other than that, it's fine. There's some dirt and sand in here as the last piece of this, so let's just take a towel and get that out. Now I like to wipe that off outside of my bench area, because if it is sand, I don't want sand getting on my board. So no, it's not that I've just forgotten about the camera angle there. I just don't want that stuff where it is. All right, let's see how we did. Well, that's a whole lot smoother than it was when we started. So there you go. Okay, this one's ready to go fishing again. So Zebco ZS3, a plastic Zebco reel. And just as a point of reference, regardless of whether the reel is a $20 reel or a $220 reel, you should service this on an annual basis. And if this one's been sitting around in the cottage for a while, do what was done here. Get that string off, replace it with new lines, so that when you do hook up, you don't have to worry about losing that fish. So this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. I hope you've enjoyed it. Have a great day.